Hello everyone, welcome to the class. My name is陈咏卉from National Zhongzhen University, Department of Business Administration. So for this online EMI course, we will be discussing some ideas on communications in business English. And this class will last for about half an hour. So let's move on to the learning objective for this online class. There are 3 different objectives for the class, including number 1, we will be able to identify key elements of effective verbal communication in a business context. Besides verbal communication, we'll also focus on number 2, on demonstrating an understanding of nonverbal communication cues, such as body language, tone, and intonation. Then, we'll focus on recognizing cultural nuances in communication styles within a business setting. Are you ready for the class? So let's start. So, before we start the class, can you think about it? Usually, for supervisors, they spend 70% of the workday communicating. And for middle managers, they'll be probably spending 80% of the workday communicating. And however, for CEOs, they spend around 94% of the way communicating. So we believe that if this person has a higher job, they will be communicating more. So it is a really interesting question that a lot of CEOs, their total communication time is spending on oral communication. So a lot of great deal of correlation. They are related with the ability to succeed as a manager and your ability to communicate. So we know that communication is very crucial when we are in the business context. So today we're going to learn some ideas on how can we communicate effectively so that we can make ourselves understood and understand by other people. Okay, so let's move on to the following slide. As we can see, when it comes to communication, a lot of people thought that we will be using a lot of percentage on verbal communication, such as writing emails or sending messages through social media. In fact, the time we spend on having verbal communication is so much less than the time we spend on verbal communication. So basically, we will be spending probably 7% of communication verbally, such as writing mails or sending memos. However, we will be spending a huge amount of time, which accounts for 93% of our communication on verbal communication or non-verbal communication, pardon me, huh? Okay. So if we're going to stay in studying for academic life, or we will be involving in different kinds of business opportunities, we believe that if we have successful communication skills, it will be able for us to reach our goals effectively. So when we're having a presentation or when we try to persuade or giving other people a speech, of course, we have to make sure that our verbal communication and non-verbal communication, they are fully developed. So basically, according to some statistics, our everyday communication is based on 7% of verbal communication and 93% of non-verbal communication. So this 93 of non-verbal communication will be including such as tone, pitch, intonation, and articulation. And we'll be discussing these ideas in the later slides. So the basic idea for this course is to help you improve your nonverbal delivery technique so that you can have a better understanding either from your coworkers, from your teachers, or from your peers. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Um, Nonverbal communication will be including four different parts, which is body language, facial expression, voice, and tone. So as for body language, we know that it is related with how our body moves. Okay, and then we sometimes will be using some gestures like very good, okay, to tell the people that somebody has done a really nice job. Or sometimes we'll be using facial expressions such as like that, okay, to tell other people that maybe we doubt this kind of idea. And also, when we're communicating with each other, we have to focus on our voice, whether we are speaking in a really fast pace or we are speaking in a really, really low pace. So the voice accounts to be one of the most important elements of having an effective communication. And then for the last part is on the tone. So, what is tone? Tone means the feeling inside in your language. If you're angry, of course, your tone will be telling other people that there's something wrong with your emotion. Maybe you feel upset. But if you're happy, maybe your tone will be different so that when people they are closing their eyes, they can still tell that whether you are happy or sad. So that is the power of tones. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. So if we want to have an effective delivery in a communication, of course, it lies on these five following parts on volume, pace, intonation, breathing, and articulation. So if we want to get our ideas across, we have to make sure that all of our delivery will be falling into these five categories. So we will be discussing this really important five elements in the later slide. Okay, so the first part, we will be talking about the voice. Basically, our voice is an instrument, and we will be using this instrument to stand out from other people, to express ourselves, and then to tell the people some of the messages that we have in our mind. So our voice is something very powerful, and that it should express our ideas clearly on who I am or who you are. So when we happen to hear other people's voices, we know these voices may come from our parents, may come from our teachers, or may come from our friends. And then if your voice can be identified by other people, of course, you will be able to convey your messages in a way that will be engaging the listeners, that will be attracting other people to pay attention to what you are talking about. So this very powerful instrument will be number one, indicates on our confidence and whether our audience knows we are in control of the situation. So we'll be using our voice to tell other people that we are the boss. So for some voice elements or vocal elements, you will be including several parts, such as the volume, like if we are talking very loud or very soft. It includes the pitch, the rate, and also how we pause or stop during a conversation. And then we have to make sure that when we are using our voice, we are having a correct pronunciation and articulation. Okay, so I have some questions for you on the voice part. So you can think about it when you are talking, maybe in Chinese or the English. Number one and number two, is your voice loud or loud enough or very, very loud? so that people can, hear you in a really distant place. Or number two, if your voice is very soft or perhaps a little bit too soft, that people they have to, what did you say? So people they have to pay attention to what you try to convey. And on number three, on your pace, do you think you are talking too slow or too quickly? And a lot of my friends or my classmates or even my students told me that when we are using Chinese, of course, we can speak a little bit faster than we are using English because English is not our mother tongue. But I think this kind of situation is totally okay. And also, when you are talking, do you think you're opening your mouth big enough in order to pronounce the words clearly? So if you're talking like that, you are not making any kind of noise. So people do not understand. So when you are talking, you have to make sure that you have to open your mouth as big as you can so that you can pronounce each and every word so that people can understand you better. Okay. And then uh, when you are using a different language, do you think the way you are talking in English is boring or not? Basically, when we are using Chinese, I think there'll be no problem if our language or our voice is not boring at all because we'll be adding a lot of information, we'll be adding a lot of emotion inside. So even if I close my eyes, my friends knows if I am angry or sad or happy. But when it comes to English, it is a different story. It's like when we're using English, for most of the time, our voice is boring and then we are not using some kind of intonation, which means our voice sometimes goes up and sometimes goes down, right? So usually we're having a monotone kind of voice. So monotone means that our voice is not going up, it's not going down. We always stay in the middle so that people will be thinking, this kind of delivery or communication is not going to be that interesting. So sometimes when it comes to communication, we have to make sure that we'll be sometimes raising our tone or kind of lower our pitch so that people will be paying more attention on what we are talking about. Then on number four, articulation. Articulation means do you pronounce each of your words clearly? So when you say something, do you open your mouth as big as possible or do you murmur? Murmur means you're talking something inside within your mouth. So you are not opening your mouth big enough, so you're murmuring. So you have to make sure that when you are talking to something or to someone, you have to make sure you articulate clearly. So that means you have to open your mouth as big as you can. Then, on the very last part, on number five, breathing. We have to make sure that we have to breathe properly. We should not run out of breath or gasp for air because if we gasp for air, it will be kind of making our communication less effective and then people will be having a harder time understanding us. So make sure that when you are presenting or communicating with other people, you breathe, inhale and exhale, and make sure that you breathe properly so that your communication will be a perfect one. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So for this part, we'll be focusing on several ideas on verbal communication. So the first part, we'll be moving on to the one on the pace part. Okay, so if we want to have a really nice pace, so that means there will be some speed limit for communication. It is just like driving a car. When you are driving a car on a street, on an avenue, or on a freeway, of course, there are different speed limits for different kinds of roads and situations. And then for some time, you have to drive slowly, but for some time, you have to drive faster, especially when you're on a highway. So having a pace for communication is just like having the speed limit when you are driving a car. Because if you are talking too fast, people they cannot get you. But if you're talking too slow, people will think you are wasting for their time. So we have to make sure there's a speed limit when we are having communication. Okay, so basically, for native speakers, they have a speed limit for about 160 to 200 words per minute. But for non-native speakers like us, maybe our speed limit will not be that high. So we can kind of change our speed limit to probably 200 words per minute. Okay, so when we are making sure that we are having the correct pace, number one, we have to make sure that if I'm talking too fast or too slow, depending on our natural speaking style, and then we have to make sure that if we are talking to a group of people that this group should be bigger or smaller. So if there are many people in the classroom, and then these many people they have to listen to you. So of course you have to make sure that the pace of your communication or presentation has to be a little bit slower than your regular speed so that they can understand you better in case there's an echo going on in the classroom. And also, if you are using a really complex vocabulary list, of course, the pace should be slower. For example, when you are doing a presentation or when you are doing an oral defense, for most of the time, you will be using some words that is really hard to pronounce or some big words that is going to explain a complicated situation. So at that time, you have to make sure that you will be speaking a little bit slower than your usual pace. And also, you have to make sure that whether your audience or your listeners they have handouts in hand or not. So if they have handouts in their hands, of course they will be able to read handouts. So you can always speak faster. A little bit faster will be okay. And if you are providing them with some visual aids, such as PPT slides, of course, you can speak faster because you know that they can see your PPT right away. So you don't have to worry about anything about whether you are speaking too slow. So make sure that you will be depending on the pace of your communication or presentation in some way. Okay, so let's move on to another part on the intonation. Okay, so when it comes to intonation, people they will be using different kinds of intonation to tell the people whether they feel sad or happy, and then the intonation at a question they will be raising at the end. And sometimes they will be raising their intonation if they want to stress an important situation or a keyword. So basically, for intonation, they are regarding with three parts. Number one, intonation is the music of the language. And then we will be using this kind of music to convince other people. So how can we change our words into music? It will be depending on two things. Number one is on the tone, and number two will be on the pitch. Okay, so tone means whether we feel happy or sad. So if we are happy, of course, you can tell from my tone that maybe I feel happy. Maybe that is my birthday. Maybe I got the first prize in the school. But you can also tell about my tone. If I am sad, maybe I got 59 in my test. I don't feel good because I got a fever. So you can tell about my tone, even if you're closing your eyes, even if you are not looking at me. So when it comes to tones, we'll be able to distinguish how other people feel. Okay, so it is one part of the intonation on telling us some ideas about the music. And then the second part is on the pitch. So how can pitch refer to the music of the language? Of course, pitch will be referring to some of the highs and lows of how our voice sound. So usually for men, they're talking in a lower pitch, and for women, they're talking in a higher pitch. So, if you are changing a pitch in a word, in a sentence, in a phrase, or in a group of words, it will be making your communication more expressive. For example, you are changing a keyword like happy birthday, like that. So people will know that you are changing pitch. So people will know that you are stressing something on something that is going to happen or something that is very, very important. So that is something about the intonation part. Okay, so let's move on to the breathing. How will we be able to make sure that our breathing will be very, very okay or not? Okay. So when it comes to breathing part, we have to make sure that we have to breathe properly. Okay. And then we will let all those O2 or oxygen flow into our body. So if we can breathe correctly, okay, we will be focusing on the following four parts. Number one, the amount of O2 or oxygen in the body. And breathing correctly will be able to help the flow of oxygen, okay, coming into our body so that the oxygen is uh, filling up our brain and our body. So, of course, we can achieve the following three things. Number one, we can think clearly. And of course, we can feel more relaxed. So, think about it. Sometimes when you are on the stage, before you go on the stage, a lot of us will take a really deep breath, right? Now, why we want to take a deep breath like that is because number one, if we take a deep breath, we feel much more relaxed. So if we are relaxed, we can think clearly and we can organize our ideas much more effectively. And of course, we can talk with less mistakes and we can speak clearly. So, of course, if we have effective breathing, it will be able to help us to control the loudness, for example, to control the voice of our communication. And then we will be able to pronounce in a single breath without running out of breath. So we don't have to breathe for many, many times in a sentence. Okay, so that is how breathing will be helping us to communicate properly during a presentation or a communication. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide about articulation. So, what is articulation? Basically, articulation is the making of sounds. And then we will try to use our tongue or our teeth or our throat and everything inside within our mouth to produce a word. So articulation is a production of individual sounds, and we will be able to make different kinds of articulation, okay, by moving our tongues inside in our mouth, right? Okay. So, if we are talking about a really important topic, okay, we have to make sure that we have to sound every single word because this topic is going to be very important, and then we want our audience to know or to understand every single word from our topic. So we have to pronounce every single word. Okay, and then after we tell our audience about our topic, we have to make sure that they understand what we are talking about. So we have to, number two, exaggerate the movement of our mouths. So what does that mean? That means we have to make something that is big enough, important enough, or better enough so that we can get ourselves understood. So when you are talking with a group of people, you have to make sure that you have to move your mouth as big as you can so that your articulation will be pretty good. Okay. So number three, I have to stress a little bit more on articulation. That means we have to pronounce each and every word when it comes to some critical or important topics in our communication. But for most of the time, we do not pronounce each and every word. But for some time, we have to do that so that our articulation will become perfect. Okay, so it is pretty much the end of this EMI class on communication in business English. So for today, we talk about nonverbal and verbal communication in business context. And then I hope that you'll be able to practice a lot for yourself. For example, when you are talking, you can make sure that you will be open your mouth as big as you can. Okay. Or sometimes you will be able to add some of your emotions inside so that people will know and understand you better when you are having communication with them. Okay. So I will see you next time, and bye bye.